Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be listening to How to Start a Nonprofit, a step-by-step guide, a session that was presented at Winter Institute 2025 in Denver, Colorado.
All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Right on the dot. I'm never on time to anything. This is crazy. I'm on time, starting the session. Well, welcome in. We are How to Start a Nonprofit, a step-by-step guide. To get us started, I just want to welcome everyone and thank our sponsors, including Ingram and all of the publishers who have supported this bookseller education that I'm so grateful to be a part of. We should be in the swing of things at this point of Winter Institute, but just some housekeeping things. We are providing slides and handouts, both in the app and in the Winter Institute 2025 program. Please make sure to fill out a survey at the end of the session. ABA takes them very seriously, and we want you to say great things about us. There will be recordings of the session available as well. So no need to take furious notes throughout the session. You can certainly go back and listen later. Please make sure to silence your cell phones, be respectful of your fellow booksellers in the room. And if you have any questions, please make sure that you wait for a mic. We have a mic over here in the back, so just raise your hand high. If you have a question or a comment, we'd be happy to hear that once you get a mic. Also, we've been over this before several times, but antitrust guidelines basically just means we can't discuss anything related to pricing, boycotts, and dividing up the market. So if we hear any of that going on, those shenanigans, we'll interrupt it. We don't want to violate those antitrust guidelines. Okay, so why are we here? So today we'll be talking about nonprofit models in various forms and how to implement them, well, at least how we implement them, and the work that goes into creating and navigating nonprofits. For us, starting a nonprofit, or for a lot of people, starting a nonprofit may seem like a really great idea, but we want you to make sure that you're entering into that decision eyes wide open, and you're making an informed decision as you head into the nonprofit space. So we're going to highlight some benefits and challenges that we've seen in working with a nonprofit model. So our agenda for today, of course, we're going to do some introductions. We're going to do a brief overview of the types of nonprofit models in the bookseller space, including hybrid models and a fully nonprofit bookstore like my own. We're going to leave lots of time for Q&A. We do know that nonprofits can be very individualized. So we want to make sure that we're addressing some of the questions that you have on your mind and leave lots of time for that at the end. Okay, so I'll kick us off with introductions. My name is Anastasia Williams. I am out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I work at a specialty bookstore, Black affirming bookstore called The Bottom in East Knoxville. And we've been open since 2020.
Should I go? Hi, I'm Mitchell Kaplan, and I'm the owner of Books and Books and the founder of Books and Books. We've been around for about 42 years now, and we're located in Miami, Florida. We have one main store and two sort of satellite stores. We also, our not-for-profit is called the Books and Books Literary Foundation. And as you'll hear more going forward, we're using a fiscal sponsor to have developed our not-for-profit. And we've been doing it now for about 1.5 to 2 years. And I look forward to talking to you about them, about what we're doing.
Hello, everyone. I'm Will Ames. I lead the bookstores and book access portfolio at Emerson Collective. I'm a former high school English teacher. And I'm excited to talk to you today about some of the work Emerson Collective is doing to support nonprofit and hybrid model bookstores. Emerson Collective is a unique organization. We're part venture capital and part philanthropy. I'll say briefly, our bookstore work sits on the philanthropic side of our organization. We believe that bookstores do a significant amount of charitable work, often on the back of a for-profit business. There's economic impact, keeping and retaining local dollars. There's social impact as a third place that's convening, building civic fabric and social cohesion. There's educational benefit as drivers of book access, making literary enrichment available. And this is essential work that we need right now in this country. We also see a problem, which is that, the main vehicle through which we support charitable work in the United States, grants and donations. Right now, a lot of bookstores are not able to take advantage of those because of the business structure that they have. And so we are trying to raise awareness of different models that would allow folks to be eligible for those grants and donations. And we're thinking about finding the right pathway so that you as a bookstore can kind of see yourself in those models. I think that are we doing misconceptions?
Yeah, I was gonna, maybe we can.
We'll do that in a second. So I'll just put a pin in that and pass it over to Rachel.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Stuckey-Slayton. I'm with Two Friends Books and Cafe in Bentonville, Arkansas. And I am the co-owner with my friend Monica over here. My relationship to nonprofits, the two most important ones are I'm the co-founder and I sit on the board of a literary nonprofit called NWA Book Fest. Oh, there was a picture of it up earlier. And then I'm also the co-founder of Two Friends Community Books, which is a 501c3 nonprofit arm to our business. So NWA Book Fest is like really a standalone literary festival. And the goal there is to really like raise awareness and excitement around readership in Arkansas. And then our bookstore's nonprofit arm, the goal there is more of an access to literary arts piece.
Great. So when we were preparing for the session, we got into a very lively discussion about some common misconceptions related to nonprofit organizations. So maybe us panelists can think about and discuss maybe your top misconception that you'd like to share with the group about organizing a nonprofit.
Sure. The thing that stymied for so long, I mean, I've been thinking about this for years and years, but the thing that stymied is that I kept thinking that I would have to create a whole new infrastructure in order to do this, that I'd have to hire an attorney, that I'd have to do, an accountant, and I'd have to, do this whole thing that just seemed way overwhelming for me. And if I knew how easy it actually was, and how much I've lost out in not doing this for so many years, I would have done it many, many, many years ago. So I think that's probably the major misconception that I was operating under.
I talk to booksellers sometimes who feel like, particularly moving to a hybrid model means they're going to have to start doing something different. They're going to have to start a set of activities, a set of programs that haven't existed before and that take time. And ultimately, I actually think so many bookstores across the country are a great fit for this model already. They are already doing the author events, the children's story times, the writers' workshops, the book fairs, on down the list of charitable activity that's happening in bookstores right now, all across the country. And so I would say, that is one misconception I see again, that this model necessarily means operating in a different way. And I actually don't think it does.
Yeah, I would agree. So, a misconception that I personally had was that forming our own 501c3 was going to be exceedingly complicated and like it felt very scary at first. But I think that I underestimated how much people wanted to help us. And we actually got a lot of pro bono advice from attorneys who this is really their job. And so I think that was something I wasn't expecting. And ultimately, if you're able to form a business, like you have the administrative chops to form a 501c3, like for sure. If you've already had to deal with government agencies with your business, you can do it to form a nonprofit.
And just when Will was just speaking, it made me realize something. A kind of moment of Zen that I had is that for years and years, and probably many of you out there, I had always been invited to these community-wide discussions about what's happening in the arts. And every time I would be invited, I'd look at the other people on stage, and they were all not-for-profits. But everybody invited me thinking as if I were a not-for-profit, but I really wasn't, in that sense. And then when this whole thing, I started thinking about it, it just made perfect sense. If I can be a hybrid, I could have a not-for-profit part of what I do, supporting all of that stuff, which has usually been supported by the sale of books, which is really, really hard to do.
Yeah, I think for me, at the bottom, we're fully nonprofit. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that and how we got started that way later. But I think something that we often hear from other folks in the industry is that sometimes they think starting a nonprofit or even a nonprofit arm of their company is going to solve all of their financial problems. Like it's just going to open up the floodgates to all of this funding. And let me just say right now, the hustle is real. And it is not a free-flowing, never-ending pot of money that you have access to. You really do have to put a lot of time, effort, energy into developing funding streams, not just for grants, but for community support, donations, donor relations, development. That's something that we spend a lot of time discussing amongst our staff. Our very small staff, mind you. So there's a lot of wonderful benefits. It makes a lot of sense for us to be nonprofit, but that doesn't mean that the work is easy. And it doesn't mean that getting the funding that you need to sustain is easy.
So true.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to move forward and maybe backtrack a little bit to talk about what do these different types of nonprofit organizations look like? How do they function? And we'll start with that. But we did want to go ahead and just mention, we are not legal experts. Make sure that you are talking to legal experts when you're considering and thinking through what does a nonprofit look like for you. But I think Will's going to take over and talk about some of the different types of nonprofits, and then we'll share what that looks like in each of our organizations.
So at Emerson Collective, we are supporting two main types of bookstore nonprofits. First, the nonprofit model. This is a single entity, usually a 501c3, that either is a bookstore or has book selling as a component of a larger organization that's doing the work of literary arts, education, cultural programming. There's some nuance here. Sometimes we see nonprofits that will then have an LLC as a subsidiary. I would also refer to that as a nonprofit model. And again, this is, single, and for the most part, it's a single entity. Bookstore is a nonprofit. Then there's the hybrid model. These are two entities that exist side by side. First is a bookstore. Usually it's an LLC or an S corp. That's how, a lot of bookstores that I come to for this work, start out as one of those two things. Sometimes we see folks that are a sole proprietorship. And then the second part of that model is a nonprofit arm. And so in that way, it's two entities. I'll spend most of my time probably talking about the hybrid model, because I think that's probably the one that's going to be relevant to most folks here that already have a bookstore. There are usually when folks are getting started under a hybrid model, they're getting started under a legal arrangement called fiscal sponsorship. And I think this is a really important concept to know and be familiar with. The idea of fiscal sponsorship is that an existing 501c3 organization can essentially lend its tax-exempt status to a bookstore to effectively make that bookstore eligible for grants and donations. And so often the way this works is a bookstore will go to, let's say it's the local community foundation in town. And it will ask that community foundation to be its fiscal sponsor. Under a comprehensive fiscal sponsorship, that community foundation can then receive grants and donations on behalf of the bookstore. Those grants and donations sit within the community foundation. And then as the bookstore incurs, what I would call charitable expenses, as the bookstore does charitable work, it can submit invoices to its fiscal sponsor and be reimbursed. This is a really nice arrangement because the bookstore is able to focus on what it does. It's book selling, but then also it's author events, children's story times, book giveaways. And it's essentially its structure, its governance hasn't fundamentally changed. As we think in the hybrid model about what each side is responsible for, the bookstore, the LLC, S Corp, sole proprietorship, that's doing retail. That's buying inventory. That's selling books. Maybe it's returning books. It's doing checkouts of the register. That retail work lives in the bookstore. And then the idea is that nonprofit arm is responsible for, almost everything else. Again, I've rattled on this list a few times, but it's children's story times. We just saw a bookstore did a Pride and Prejudice ball with actual country dancing teachers to show people how to do the dances. That would be a great thing to fall under the nonprofit arm because it's about community building. It may be about education if there is a book component. And so that's a little bit of the hybrid model and how it gets started. There are bookstores that may continue on under fiscal sponsorship that say this hybrid model works well with our nonprofit arm under the auspices of a supportive nonprofit. And that's one pathway. And that's a pathway that I think makes sense for a lot of bookstores. And then there are other bookstores that often that feel like they've got capacity, energy, muscle to go a bit further. And that will ultimately have their own 501c3 nonprofit. That means that they're incorporating a nonprofit corporation in their state. And then it means that they're applying for tax exempt status with the IRS, which is a federal designation. That has some steps to it. And there's a long form, the 1023 form that is complex. And I would recommend if you're filling that out to have a lawyer work on that with you. For bookstores that have their own nonprofit, often the operations are very similar. The bookstore often will assume charitable expenses and then go to its nonprofit arm to be reimbursed. One of the benefits here is that if you have an employee, for example, let's take a children's story time maybe as a case study. Maybe your employee works 6 hours doing retail book selling, but then they've got an hour to plan their story time and an hour to actually execute it. So they've done 6 hours of retail work, 2 hours of what I would call charitable work, doing literacy enrichment with kids. The bookstore, bookstores that we work with will often pay for all 8 hours of that bookseller's time on their payroll, but then they'll put together an invoice and submit to their nonprofit arm, whether it's fiscally sponsored or not, for reimbursement and be reimbursed for those 2 hours. And that way, that employee is not having to deal with two separate W-2s. It saves them a lot of headache, and it makes things often clean and easy and efficient for the bookstore. So bringing this all together, again, hybrid model, bookstore, nonprofit arm. Nonprofit arm can be its own 501c3, or it can be fiscally sponsored. And often it's most efficient and advantageous for the bookstore to keep a lot of its operations on the for-profit side, but then to seek reimbursement from the nonprofit. I will say as a caveat, there are nonprofit organizations, hybrid models that grow past that. And there are a few examples of hybrid models we see that do actually staff up on the nonprofit side, which is a totally viable path. But again, one thing I like to stress is you don't have to get there right away. And there is actually a few different pathways depending on the level of operational and organizational complexity that you want to take on. I've been talking for about 6 minutes. I think maybe I've got about 3 minutes left. Keep going. Okay. One of the questions that comes up is the question of private benefit. If you're in your community, and you are fundraising, how do you, talk to your community about what you're doing, about why it actually makes sense for this bookstore to be raising charitable dollars? One piece of that is the idea that there is an arm's length distance between the bookstore and the nonprofit. So I mentioned a lot of bookstores start under fiscal sponsorship. In fiscal sponsorship, often the grant dollars are coming in again to a nonprofit, a community foundation that is not the bookstore. And then that nonprofit is reimbursing the bookstore for charitable expenses. In that way, that nonprofit has its own board. That nonprofit is looking at those expenses and seeing them actually as an extension of its own work. And so in that way, there's a separation between the owner of the bookstore and then the board of a nonprofit that's making decisions about how it furthers its mission. Often we encourage the bookstores we partner with, if you can find a local nonprofit that really understands what you're doing and understands why kids having access to books, kids having access to compelling enrichment opportunities, authors coming to places that authors might not be able to go otherwise, is a huge value to the community that often local nonprofits are serving. That's an important piece here. So when you're under fiscal sponsorship, that arm's length is built in. If you eventually decide you want to have your own nonprofit, one important piece that we coach our booksellers through, our bookstore owners cannot have a controlling interest on the board of their nonprofit arm. So if you have a spouse and you're the owner of a bookstore, you and your spouse cannot be 2/3 of the board. You and your spouse will need at least 2 other people on that board who are not in your family. And in that way, if you have 50% of the board, you are not a controlling interest on the board. From there, the board of your nonprofit will need to essentially vote in its bylaws and essentially its way of operating. We encourage when that vote happens, for our owners, if they want to recuse themselves, that's a totally fair and valid thing to do. You will want to make sure when you're constructing that board, again, it's people who understand what you're doing, who understand this model and why it makes sense for a bookstore to have a nonprofit arm. We at Emerson Collective, and it's not public, but we essentially have some guidelines for what we think the best operations of a hybrid model look like. We're not there yet in terms of being able to, right now, that's something we kind of iterate on and work with our partners. But we're hoping to get there eventually. Once those operations have been voted on, the board will also need to vote on an implementer of the operations of the nonprofit arm. Often that is the bookstore owner. Sometimes it's a manager, but that should be someone who has this vision and can steward the hybrid model in the way that it needs to go. If you are a bookstore owner, you'll always want to be able to say, I was voted into this position as executive director by a board of which I did not have a controlling interest. And that is how we create that arm's length when the hybrid model is running with its own 501c3. All right, the last thing I'll say before I wrap, in terms of just kind of big picture trade-offs, we talked about what it looks like to be a nonprofit, a hybrid model under fiscal sponsorship, what it means to be a hybrid model with your own 501c3. And I haven't talked about this as much, but there's also this totally viable path where you just are a nonprofit as a bookstore. I would say the benefit of fiscal sponsorship is, again, you're able to offload a lot of the administrative complexity onto the fiscal sponsor. One of the downsides there is you will have less control over your fundraising. Ultimately, the funds that come in are going to a different organization. And so there may be less that you're able to do as you build up your fundraising apparatus. Organizations that are under comprehensive fiscal sponsorship can always transition to their own 501c3 when they're ready. When you have your own nonprofit, that is a little bit more, you'll have to do the board governance, you'll have to do accounting and tax filings. You're not doing that if you're under fiscal sponsorship, but you're gaining a lot of ownership over the organization. You may be able to do more advanced fundraising. And there's some branding questions there that you can have more control over when you have your own organization. And then finally, I'll say the nonprofit model is a model that we at our organization are less familiar with. It takes the commercial activity of bookstores and puts it under the same roof as nonprofit activity. That's a little bit less of a well-known pathway for the IRS. We find it's very clean and simple and easy for our folks to apply to the IRS as nonprofit arms that aren't doing the bookselling. When the bookselling comes in, it's a little bit more of a story that you have to tell about why bookselling is existing in the context of a charitable organization. We're hoping to eventually have guidance on that, but we don't have it quite yet. So that's my overview of hybrid and nonprofit model bookstores.
Thanks, Walt. Okay, so from here, now that we have a good understanding of the different types of nonprofit models, we are going to each talk about our specific organizations and how that plays out. So we'll start with books and books.
Yeah, hi. So we went with the fiscal sponsor model. We're a hybrid store. We're an ongoing bookstore, and now we have the Books and Books Literary Foundation. And we're very fortunate because in Coral Gables, there's a really great Coral Gables Community Foundation that we've been working with for years and years. They know us. We know them. They're actually across the street from us is where their offices are. So, and for them, this was a real experiment. They've never really worked with a for-profit business in the very same way. The one thing that Will didn't talk about in his excellent talk was the fact that when you do go with a fiscal sponsor, typically they take a percentage of all monies that come in. And usually it's anywhere from 2 to 6% or so. Would that be right? Sometimes higher.
I would say 2 to 10%.
2 to 10%. We, fortunately, because the Coral Gables Community Foundation wanted to work with us, they went on the lower end of that. And we've been working beautifully together. So in the year and a half that we've been doing it, there have been absolutely no bumps at all. It's very much exactly as Will talked about, that we take donations. And if you go to our website, you'll see there's a donate button. But when you hit the donate button, it takes you to the Coral Gables Community Foundation, and they've created a page very much like our page. So it kind of mirrors it. So, there's a little bit of confusion every once in a while, but, we always brand ourselves as working with the Coral Gables Community Foundation. That's somebody. I don't think it's me, finally. So what I think is instructive and what Will brought up, and I think it makes it's really important, is the notion of how do you express this to your community? What I discovered is you tell everybody, oh, you've got a community, you've got a not-for-profit. They go, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing? So we've always started by saying, support us, and this allows us to keep doing what we do and even more. And so that's kind of what our mindset is. It's helping us to continue our 400 readings that we do a year. It helps us to do all of the good work that we've always been doing, but it now allows us to do like free book giveaways. We have a program that we're working with the Miami-Dade Public Schools that we're calling Meet an Author, Build a Library, where an author's coming in and the foundation is buying a book for every kid who's there. And we've adopted about 16 Title I schools in Miami. And we just want to flood the zone with books, particularly in these days where you have book banning and all of that. And we've kind of worked our way in, but that's not really been an issue right now. So that's, and here, those booksellers out there who do a lot of, books, authors in the schools. I'm sure many of you and most of you do that. You know what the pressure is. The pressure is they want you to send an author to a school where the kids are going to buy a lot of books, right? So this allows us to get authors down and say, look, we're going to sell 1,000 books through the foundation. So come and spend a couple days in Miami and you'll be able to do that. And they send the author down, and then the foundation actually buys the books to give to the kids. It's great. It's been this week we're giving away about 3,000 books. We've got Brad Meltzer coming in with his illustrator. He's doing 4 schools. We have another woman who's coming in named Elizabeth Shreve. And then we have a couple of local kids writers who are doing schools as well. And what it's done for us as well, just in the city of Miami, or in the county of Miami-Dade County, it's giving us a way into the public schools, particularly now when it's under siege. We found that person in the public schools who, can advocate for the authors that we're bringing in. The other thing that has made, my whole idea is why reinvent the wheel, right? So there are organizations in everyone's community that are touching the people we want to give books to. So our partnerships are many and varied. So we have a program that we're working with this group called Exchange for Change, which is in the prisons. And they lift up people who are in the prisons by teaching them writing and other stuff. So we have a program with every returning prisoner, every returning person into the, outside of prison. We are giving them a full library of books that they choose, full library being 6 books of their choice. We give them lists. We work out the lists with them. So they're already dealing with those folks, and we're just bringing books to what their effort is. Another group, there's something called the Chapman Partnership for the Homeless. And there are, you go there and you spend 3 months and they help you become housed in some particular way. So we've started a series of free book fairs, on a Saturday afternoon, and we curate them. They're not remainders. We curate them as if it's a good representation of our bookstore, all new books. So they feel like they're getting something, really important. And it's wildly successful. On Saturday before I came here, we gave away about $10,000 worth of books to these folks who just, gobbled them up. I was wondering if there'd be stuff left. And this is a wide variety of titles. And there weren't. I mean, it's fascinating. And it made me think, this is kind of what I want to do, with the rest of my life, is give away books in some particular way. So the fiscal sponsor has been really elegantly simple for us because I didn't want to have to hire accountants. I hate board of directors. I didn't want to manage a board. I mean, to be honest, I don't know if Will's had this experience at all with any of the bookstores that he's worked with, but there have been a couple of boards of not-for-profits that I've known that's hijacked. They've hijacked the not-for-profit. That's something I would never want to see happen. So if you do a board, make sure they're maybe not family members, but close to it. I don't know if I'm speaking too much out of turn, but it really is really important that
this
happens.
Is not legal advice.
Right, it's not legal advice. Believe me, it's not legal advice. And just the last thing I would say is, I should tell you, I'm going to read for you just a little bit. I talked to you about the messaging. So this is what's literally on our website about the reason for us. The Books and Books Literary Foundation allows us to keep doing what we do best and to expand it even further into our community. The foundation is partnering with impactful nonprofits to bring free books and a love of literature to our community. And that's kind of what our ethos is in terms of what we're trying to do. So, if you have any questions about doing this, or if you're going to talk to one of your community foundations, the woman who I work with at the Coral Gables Community Foundation, she knew I was speaking today. She's more than happy to talk to any community foundations in your community to let her know, exactly how this is operating. Thank you.
All right. Rachel, do you want to go next?
Yes. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, I am involved with 2 different literary nonprofits, one that is more closely attached to our bookstore, and then the other that is completely separate. And that's really what I'm going to be focusing on more. So NWA Book Fest actually started as a special project from a bookstore in our region called Underbrush. The owners were just like, we want to see a literary festival happening in Northwest Arkansas. And so they made it happen, just kind of on the dime of the bookshop. But it was so successful. The first year we had about 1,000 attendees, which for us felt like a really, a real win. And then they invited all of the local independent bookstores to be vendors and, local authors, all of this. And then also, before it was a nonprofit, they put on a big book swap event. And the whole kind of ethos driving this was to get people excited about reading and have a place where they can gather, meet each other, build community, like basically an extension of our bookstores where like that's already happening, but just in like a bigger party way. So after the success of both of those events, Courtney decided this could be a really cool opportunity to turn this into a 501c3 and kind of like you were saying, expand the work you're already doing, alleviate the pressure from the bookstore, and then allow BookFest to apply for programmatic grants and sponsorships and all of this, that it's just so much harder to do if you're a for-profit business. They approached me, and together we created a really strong mission. And then one of the things, if you're thinking about doing the actual 501c3, my sister-in-law, She is a tax attorney for a big corporate firm in New York. And she was like, we have to do pro bono work. So if you're looking to form a 501c3, let me know and we might be able to help you. So I just want to put that out there that ask for help. And what we're doing is so exciting, I think. All of us, what we're doing is exciting. And I feel like it's easy to get excited about books and literacy. So we had the help of an attorney to get our 501c3 status. And it's allowed us to sort of do additional fundraising and blow up the book fest in a way that feels sustainable, but also exciting. And this year we're going to be adding a kids book fest that's just for children between the ages of 2 and 14 maybe. And then also creating some support systems for our local authors. One of the biggest requests that we're getting at the Book Fest from local people is I have an idea, but I don't know what to do with it. And so creating some sort of community for our local authors as well. So this, I feel is really that awareness, yes, let's get excited about books and reading. And then for our bookstores nonprofit, Two Friends Community Books, that's really more. So my background is in media and advertising. And so I'm thinking about this kind of in those terminology. If you're going to do a media campaign, you have two goals, basically driving awareness or driving conversions. So BookFest is the awareness. Community Books is the conversion. And with Community Books, actually on Friday, we opened a pay what you can bookstore. It's a mutual aid style bookstore in a town just south of us. The model is pay what you can at a self-service kiosk. Basically, if you want to take a book home with you, you make a donation to our nonprofit. It is truly up to you what you can pay. So if it's $1, if it's $0, you could take a book home. We would never know. And that's your business. And that's why we're here. The two of those kind of play together in a way that I think is interesting.
Thank you. So I'm here to represent maybe the least widely used model of a nonprofit. And at the bottom, we are fully a nonprofit bookstore organization or a bookstore within a nonprofit organization. We kind of identify as both. But one of the reasons why we decided to do that is, I'll give you some context about the bottom first, and then you'll maybe see why we decided to go that route. But the bottom was created in 2020 by a sociologist named Dr. Nkechi Elamine. And she was studying race and place in Appalachia for her dissertation. And through that work in Knoxville, she uncovered a Black neighborhood called the Bottom, which there are bottoms synonymous to Black neighborhoods all over the U.S. that have similar histories. And she got a chance to speak with a lot of the elders that used to live in that neighborhood, uncovered a lot of things that were not publicly recorded in any way. And these folks who lived in the Bottom were forcibly removed from their homes due to urban renewal. They built a highway straight through it. And they weren't given proper compensation for their loss either. So it displaced a lot of Black folks in Knoxville, and you can certainly still feel the effects of that in current day Knoxville as well. So as she was doing this research and uncovering this history, she really wanted to just do something about it to reclaim some space in East Knoxville where this community once stood, to honor those elders who were sharing their stories, and honestly to be a community hub space to bring Black culture back together in a centralized location. And so that's where the Bottom was birthed. It started out, honestly, as a sewing entrepreneurship program called Sew It, Sell It, which we still run today. Dr. Elamine, she sews and was really passionate about teaching kids that skill and creating a micro business. So that's a program that we still run today. And through that, we were able to file for 501c3 status for our organization. And it's kind of branched off into a lot of different ways, right? So After that program, we decided to have the bookstore. We had 40 titles in the bookstore at that time. And again, a lot of this comes from the passion and the expertise of Dr. El-Amin, but also of the staff that were coming into contact with the bottom and wanting to be on board. So we started with a very small bookstore. And the proceeds of that kind of go to, support all of the other things that we do for our mission. Since then, we have purchased our own building in East Knoxville. Ownership was very important for us to, again, reclaim that space. We have the bookshop that has grown from 40 titles to over 4,000 titles by Black authors. And we have a community art space within the building as well, where we have a ceramic studio, a kiln. We have actually multiple art studios, multi-purpose. We run lots of different workshops and programming that's free or low cost for community members in that way. So as you can see, we do a lot. We also have a podcast studio. I mean, I was just kind of writing down some of the things that we do on my notebook, and I ran out of space on my notebook. We do a lot. And because of that multifaceted nature of our work, to us, it made a lot of sense, especially since we were a brand new organization in 2020, to start out fully nonprofit and to drive everything towards the mission. So I'm going to read the mission from our website because it's something that we revisit honestly every day. So the Bottom is a nonprofit cultural organization serving the community through a Black affirming bookshop and arts programming. Rooted in place justice, the Bottom stands to build community, celebrate culture, and engage the creativity of Black people in Knoxville. The Bottom strives to cultivate a sense of belonging, togetherness, and safety for Black people in Knoxville and beyond. So as you can see with that mission, everything that we do relates to that, and everything that we do, it has to relate to that because we're a 501c3. So I think something that for us, it might not make it makes a lot of sense, right? Because we each bring something different to the table at the Bottom. We have, and being a nonprofit for us really makes a unique structure as well. I get a lot of people come up to me and ask me, like, are you the owner? It's like, we don't really think of it as traditional ownership in that way. We consider ourselves stewards of the organization. And we've designed our structure so that we're kind of directors of our departments, and we're all stewarding that space together. And we make a lot of really collaborative decisions across the different aspects of our organization. So Dr. Nkechi El-Amin remains our founding director. She certainly, she's in Atlanta now, but participates in an advisory role. We meet with her about every other week. And she's very in the know about everything going on at the Bottom. I'm the director of the bookshop. So I do all things bookshop, ordering, events, programming. It's a lot. And then we'll have someone, director of art. And then we also have a director of operations who kind of ties it all together and keeps us, fiscally responsible and make sure that we're tracking and reporting for taxes and things in the appropriate way. So we really enjoy the structure. I think for us, there's a lot of benefits, but we understand that not everyone can do it the way that we did it. It made sense for us because we started the organization as a fully nonprofit organization. But if we had been more established, I think we would decide to just have a nonprofit arm as well. So some of the other things that we do at the Bottom that kind of relate to the nonprofit structure that we have a free literature program for kids. It's called Lit Kids. In that program, families can sign up. It's totally free to them, and their Lit Kid can get a free book a month from us. They get a little punch card. It's very cute when a little kid hands you their punch card. So adorable. And we do free workshops for them. It's usually a story time plus workshop format for the kids. An example of that is we read a book about a little boy who stuttered and could not speak, but he communicated through art. So again, we're constantly finding ways to tie literature and arts together through our organization. So we did a story time with that book, and then we had the kids do self-portraits, which are very cute. You can see them on our Instagram. So we do things like that, right? It's all about education. It's all about uplifting and amplifying Black voices in our community. It's about bringing the community together A lot of what we do is driving towards reconciling the Black community in East Tennessee and Knoxville. But our organization is for everybody, and we're in the business of bringing community together. Another program that we do is we started partnering with a local speakeasy in town, and we have these monthly sip and reads, which are silent book club experiences. So people come in, they read for an hour, and then we do, and the second hour is just a community building activity. So getting to know each other, doing a bingo. We did one where they created a story together, right? So it's time and time again, new people are coming to that event who either know our bookstore or not, but what they leave being a part of our community from there. We also do a tiny bookshop concert series, similar to like NPR's Tiny Desk. And again, that's another way for us to bring art and literature together. We have a lot of connections to local musical artists in town that come in and they perform in our bookshop, and we're able to promote both music and literature at the same time. And we do lots of giveaways. We do a lot of education. We started a banned book club in town, and we've done a lot of sessions on educating folks on the state of banned books in the state of Tennessee and beyond. And we use our banned book club, as a catalyst for change in that space and for advocacy. But yeah, we do a lot. I mean, I'm tired just like talking about us, but we love what we do. And I did want to mention too, something about, maybe this can be filed under misconceptions. Even I think the concept of a nonprofit, there is this sentiment that there's a lot of burnout. And I think that is still true, even if you're a bookshop in that space. I think as a nonprofit, for us, we are often seen in our community as like everything Black for everybody. And we can't be everything Black for everybody. We can't. We have to really focus in on and tie things to our mission and be very mindful about that. We're also a small but mighty crew. And like I said, the hustle for funding is real. And we have to pay ourselves. And so I think we think a lot about burnout and how we can navigate the demands of our work and our role. And we know that it's important, but we also know that we have to sustain not only our organization, but we have to sustain our bodies and our physical space that we're so blessed to have. So those are things that we think about as well. All right.
Open to questions.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all from us. Hopefully we gave you some really great examples of what nonprofits can look like, but we're going to open it up for Q&A. Again, we have a mic going around. It's in the back of the room now, and then we'll have some time for more questions.
Hi. This question, I guess, is more for Mitch, but it'd be helpful to hear from everybody. I don't have a lot of clarity when you're talking about going out and doing the book giveaways and the work that you're doing, what that financial breakdown from the bookstore looks like in terms of, the booksellers putting that together and organizing that, and where does that split come from, and how do you parse that out, if that makes sense?
Excuse me. Well, along the lines of what Will had talked about, we have our staff keep track of the hours that they're spending on doing the book giveaway, and then we actually sell the books to the foundation. The bookstore sells the books to the foundation. It's pretty simple. At a discount, a small discount, but at a discount. And then what we do is we actually then create a bill that we then send the bookstore. The bookstore sells it to the foundation. Excuse me. And then the foundation bills our fiscal sponsor for it, basically. And then the fiscal sponsor pays us for what the cost was. No, the fiscal sponsor is the Carl Gables Foundation. Does that answer your question in terms of the breakdown?
Sorry, I just want to walk away and feel like I'm sort of clear on that. So you're selling the books at a discount to the Coral Gables.
Think about what you would do to any not-for-profit that came to you and asked you to sell books to them.
All right.
We do the very same thing.
Thank you.
And one of the things that Will's group has done is there's a kind of roadmap where they've worked with lawyers and accountants and people just to make sure that what we're doing is within, completely proper in terms of what we're doing, which it is.
Okay, thank you.
Just to jump, because it is an important piece. So this relationship of book selling to the nonprofit arm makes sense for the bookstore, just like it would make sense to sell books to any other nonprofit B2B customer. You're passing on, usually when I see bookstores that do that, they're passing on a slight discount off of the retail price. If you are a nonprofit and your mission is uplifting your community, it does not make sense to schlep your dollars outside of your community to Amazon when you're buying books for events. And so the nonprofit usually is getting that discount. They're also getting a bookstore in their backyard. So when the books come in, they're not having to be schlepped a long way. That's a huge advantage in terms of convenience. The nonprofit's not having to set up its own shipping and receiving, its own accounts with publishers. So there's big advantages to the nonprofit.
We're really good at giving ourselves good customer service. The other thing I should say along these lines, and it's a shout. There are two things. One is what this foundation has done is create an excitement within the bookstore, within our staff, that we're doing something, extremely meaningful. But what we're also able to do, I don't know how many of you have cafes and that sort of thing, but we've also, under direction of my son, happens to be here, and I'm going to give him a shout out, who's turned around our cafe into becoming a very vital part of our community. We're able to do things that we're calling empathy dinners and that sort of thing, where our cafe is charging the foundation for various things as well. So we're kind of using the totality of the store to be able to serve the foundation in a particular way.
Can I add one thing to the book buying component? The nonprofit arm to our bookshop buys books from our bookshop, but that also buys books at the same terms from another local bookstore. We have a Spanish language bookstore in our community, and the Pay What You Can bookshop has a really exciting Spanish language section. And so we've actually had that community partnership with another bookstore. So yes, we're benefiting, but also another local bookstore is benefiting, and they have expertise that we don't necessarily have. And they've also been incredible partners in media plans and getting the word out to press and, reaching customers that speak Spanish that we don't reach. So I would also just like to note that the nonprofit can also be working with bookstores outside of your own, and that can come back and benefit your bookstore.
I had a question about the fiscal sponsorship. When you first set that partnership up, did you have to negotiate the percentage of funds that you were going to raise through the bookstore part of that, or is all the charitable contributions coming from the Coral Gables Foundation, the money they raised, or are you raising part of that money?
The Coral Gables Foundation doesn't raise money. The reason why you sometimes can be with a community foundation, typically what a community foundation is, it's the wealth in the community that's there, and then they give grants to other groups. And what's very cool about it is we've gotten some grants from some of the other people who have their money in the Coral Gables Community Foundation, which is great. But all the money that we raise all that money. So it's money that's coming in from us. And the 2% that we pay is on new money that comes in. It's not like the money that's just sitting there and every year they charge another 2%. We're paying 2%. They take 2% out of that. And that's probably on the low end. And you probably do need to negotiate a little bit, but.
One thing I want to jump in and add on the question of fiscal sponsorship. I've been talking about a particular kind of fiscal sponsorship, which is a comprehensive fiscal sponsorship. That means the sponsor is seeing the bookstore's charitable activity as an extension of what they are doing as a nonprofit to serve their mission, which means at the end of the year, they're ultimately filing on behalf of that activity and accounting for those dollars to the IRS. There are some nonprofits that do a different flavor of fiscal sponsorship. In legal parlance, it's sometimes called Model C, or pre-approved grantor-grantee relationship, where the fiscal sponsor acts more as a pass-through. They get the dollars that you raise, and they turn around, take a smaller percentage, and give them to you, which gets you the funds, but then it essentially commits you to ultimately starting your own nonprofit, probably in the next 2 to 3 years, so that the IRS can eventually account for where those dollars went. So my recommendation usually with bookstores that want to try out a hybrid model is to try to get a foundation to agree to what's called a Model A comprehensive fiscal sponsorship, which ultimately doesn't commit the bookstore to starting its own nonprofit. It's very important that you get clarity with your fiscal sponsor on the type of fiscal sponsorship that they're providing, and whether it's comprehensive or whether it's more of a pass-through.
Hi. I was wondering if you have any tips, tricks on fundraising. It's not the most fun thing, but yeah.
I think the communications piece is so important. I think Will may have mentioned it earlier, but you really have to tell your story quite often and well, so that the community knows who you are. They know what you do in and out, and that every event that we do at the bottom, we're sharing that story. And we're sharing the needs of our organization and how we're using funding, so that people feel connected to us and that they want to be a part of it. So we spend a lot of time. One of the first positions that we hired besides the directors was a communications and marketing person, because that aspect of it is so important. And then secondary to that is then focusing on the development piece, who is a person who can, or a team who can focus on the donor relations aspect of it, right? So for people who do take that step and provide you money, how are you developing those relationships and making sure that they're not just one-time donors, but continuous donors? And a lot of that takes fostering those relationships, inviting them, giving personal invitations to some of the events we hold. We do that a lot, including them in our board. If people are showing up time and time again and want to work with us, that's maybe an indication that they might be a good fit for our board. They have the right connections and things like that. So it's relationship building, it's communications, it's marketing, and all of that kind of ties into asking for donations. We've noticed that sometimes our community, they get a bit complacent, I think. But if we have an emergency or something, they're on top of it. But we're trying to think of ways on how to sustain and maintain that excitement of those donations throughout without having an emergency. An example of that is 2 Julys ago, last July, or 2 years ago almost, we had a major plumbing incident. It was going to cost $15,000 to keep our building open. If we weren't a nonprofit, probably would have closed this. We just didn't have the capital at the time to cover it without donor support, right? So we were able to raise the funding we needed in a matter of weeks, just based on sharing what was happening in the building, talking to everyone, sending that out to everyone that's donated to us in the past. And our community was there for us.
This is an avenue that I recently learned about, but you may already know about it. It's with your local bank. If they are a commercial lender to your bookstore and you have a nonprofit arm, I would encourage you to talk to your commercial lender about community reinvestment funds. This is money that banks have to be giving away every year. And the amount varies for sure, but the application process is usually just so much easier than a traditional foundation grant application. And as a busy bookstore person, also doing this nonprofit work, that streamlined experience I found to be really helpful. And it was less restricted also in the use of the funds.
Hi, I'm curious is there a threshold of the type of bookstore? Is there a legal definition of what constitutes a bookstore? Because there's so many different models out there. There are online stores only that do pop-ups and have occasional run a festival, for example. How does this apply across those multiple formats for bookstores, or is it simply a bookstore with a physical presence that operates in a specific community at a specific time?
I'll say from our organization, we look at, when we're looking at partnerships, we're looking at brick and mortar bookstores. We're not looking at online bookstores. But in principle, I think there could be ways for online bookstores or pop-ups to take advantage of this to some extent. I think the presence of a brick and mortar is important to the kinds of charitable work we usually see happening. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's just what came to mind.
Yeah, I have a question, probably mostly for Mitch here. Did you find that you had to hire additional staff to do maybe fundraising, work with publishers, schedule school events, or were you able to do it with your existing staff?
That's a great question. The only person that we have hired that's paid directly, doesn't do bookstore work, but does foundation work, is a woman who's very well known in working with not-for-profits in Miami, who sort of helps coordinate things for us. We have a weekly meeting, so she's on the coordinating level, and we pay her a retainer. It's a modest retainer once a month, but generally we've been utilizing all the people that we have in the store, in order to carry out the functions of the foundation, all the additional charitable work that we're doing. And what I've done, just so it doesn't sort of get out of hand, is that in the last year, have been acting basically as the executive director of this foundation, because I know all the different pieces in the store and who can do what best and who can do what fast. So I'm kind of parceling all that out. But there are people who are getting more and more excited in what we're doing, and I expect I'll have them be working a little bit more on foundation work as time goes on.
So we have time for one more question.
All right, so I'll piggyback on that because I think it's similar. So I guess I'm thinking about a lot of booksellers knowing that sometimes they don't draw their own salaries or any kind of compensation. And then that question, does that woman's salary get paid from, where does that woman's salary get paid
directly from the foundation?
Which is not, so I think I'm getting confused in the words.
Not the Coral Gables Foundation.
So Coral Gables Foundation, so it's your books and books.
Yeah, just think of the Coral Gables Foundation is our fiscal sponsor. That's where our money resides.
Right. So they pay everything. So our book, is there a pathway in this, if you're doing a lot of work for those nonprofits that you start for bookseller compensation?
Yeah, because what happens is, if a bookseller is working on a foundation event, it could be you. You could take your bookstore bills the foundation for the work that you're doing. And then the foundation pays the bookstore. You still are paid by the bookstore, but the bookstore is then billing the foundation. And I haven't quite done that much, but we're able to, I've been thinking about our events coordinator, so all of those people who are spending so much time on all of our author events, which are community building events.
The bookstore bills the nonprofit,
right,
and the nonprofit gets paid
by the fiscal sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an element here where, your bookseller may already be doing that children's story time. They may already be organizing that author event. And so if you're able to get, 1 or 2 of their hours of their time paid for by the grant dollars, that's freeing up a little working capital for you as a bookstore to deploy elsewhere, which I think is really valuable.
Thank you all so much for coming to the session. Yeah. If you have any additional questions, we'll hang up here for a couple more minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!